One of my highly intelligent and very beautiful subscribers recently commented that they lack deck building discipline. So I wanted to take the opportunity to discipline my subscriber with this video. What is deck building discipline? Deck building discipline is the practice of staying focused on your deck strategy, prioritizing synergy, and resisting the urge to include cards that don't directly support your game plan. A lot of people might hear that definition and think it means removing fun cards from their deck. However, I think it's actually the opposite, and lack of deck building discipline is what leads people to having fun building a deck, but not actually having fun while playing that deck. Let's start by looking at the first part of the definition, staying focused on your deck strategy. A lot of popular commanders lend themselves easily to a certain theme. With Jodah, the Unifier, it's easy and obvious to build him as Legendary Tribal, especially Legendary Creature Tribal, and you could also easily specifically do Legendary Humans. However, a theme is not a strategy. A strategy would be something like mid-range or aggro or control or stacks. For example, when I built Jodah, I added in all the low-cost stacks legendary creatures I could, as well as some low-cost aggro pieces, and built a deck with the idea I would play low-cost legendaries on curve until I hit turn 5 and played Jodah, at which point all my low-power legendaries would become sizable threats. Because I had a very specific idea of what I wanted to do with the deck, it made cutting cards easy. I knew right away that I wasn't going to run Timeless Lotus, or Avacyn Angel of Hope, or Maelstrom Nexus, as none of those fit the strategy. Instead, I wanted to be running cards like Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, any of the Thalias, or Derevi. Having a clear vision for the deck and sticking to that vision made the deck easier to build and more fun to play. An additional bonus of sticking to a specific strategy is that it also makes one of the more difficult parts of the game much easier: mulliganing. Mulliganing is hard, but if you have a specific game plan in mind when you build a deck, it'll be much easier to know if you should keep a hand or not. For example, my Giada Waifu Angel Tribal deck has a heavy focus on playing 4 mana angels on turn 3, and so I know that any opening hand with 2 to 3 lands and 1 4-drop angel is a good hand that I want to keep. Of course, that's a very specific part of the strategy. More broadly, the deck leans heavily towards battlecruiser magic, but it's important to also have specific lines of play in mind. You need to be thinking about things like, what turn will I cast my commander? Are you trying to cast your 4-mana commander consistently on turn 3? If so, you'll want to pack in plenty of 2-mana ramp. If someone wipes the board on turn 4, what's your plan from there? Will you have something to protect your commander from the board wipe, or will you have other ways to keep moving ahead on mana so you can recast your commander? If your plan is to play your commander later, what will you do before your commander comes down? Will you be the one who wipes the board? If so, how will you reliably have that board wipe in hand? Thinking about lines of play with this level of specificity will help you decide what cards you want in your opening hand, because you'll have a plan for those cards. The second part of the definition is prioritizing synergy. For me, trying to maximize synergy is one of my favorite parts of building casual EDH decks. I really enjoy sticking to specific themes and ensuring all my cards fit within that theme and work well with each other. So for example, with my Giada Angel deck I just mentioned, I only run angels in the deck. I don't run generically good non-angel creatures like Roaming Throne or Esper Sentinel because they don't work with things like Folk Hero or Path of Ancestry. It's true that Esper Sentinel is one of the best turn 1 plays you can make in EDH, but later in the game it often won't do anything for me. Plus, I just don't want to have to remember that things don't synergize. I don't want to have to remember that Roaming Throne and Esper Sentinel won't draw me a card from Folk Hero because they aren't angels. Plus, Roaming Throne doesn't even have any synergy with my commander since Giada's counter ability is a replacement effect and I can't use mana from her to cast Roaming Throne. I don't like it when cards don't synergize well together like that, and usually the optimal deck building strategy is to trust your feelings on these things and play decks that feel good to you. With the Jodah example, I took a similar approach where, because I ran effects like Kataki, War's Edge, and Thalia, Guardian of Thraban, I didn't want to run Sol Ring, especially since it didn't help me cast Jodah and it isn't legendary, so it couldn't trigger his Cascade ability. I also didn't bother running so many standard generically good cards I see on the EDH rec page. Now I understand Swords to Plowshares, Counterspell, Teferi's Protection are all very strong cards, but generically good cards were not necessarily the ideal cards for the Jodah deck I built. Instead, I run cards which have similar effects but synergize with my deck. So to protect my own board, instead of cards like Heroic Intervention and Teferi's Protection, I use legendary creatures like Boromir, Warden of the Tower, and Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard. And for counterspell effects, I instead run Airtie, Resurrected, and Venser, Shaper Savant. Although these cards aren't as mana efficient, they actually fit well with my deck strategy, and in EDH, at least in its casual form, it's typically better to run synergistic cards over mana efficient ones because your primary concern isn't mana efficiency, but developing card or permanent advantage against 3 other players. And none of that is to say you can't run those cards in a Joda deck. It's just that's a different deck, and I'd have to build out the entire rest of the deck to fit with the more control or mid-range strategy those cards are appropriate for. For example, my Yoshimaru Kodama legendary tribal deck runs Sol Ring, and it also runs generically good cards like Teferi's Protection, Heroic Intervention, and Swords to Plowshares. But it has the draw needed to deal with the card advantage I lose from casting these spells. Just to show you what to me represents a kind of ideal deck in terms of synergy, I have this Joda list I'm working on in which every single card, including the lands, are legendary. It's actually 101 legendaries in total because it has Jegantha as the companion to try to help me with the mana screw. Admittedly, it still doesn't have a strategy. Literally, I'm just trying to make the theme work, and unfortunately it isn't working. It still isn't viable in my play group because the legendary lands don't give me the reliable color fixing I need, but hopefully in the near future I'll have better options for that. The last part of my definition is resisting the urge to include cards that don't directly support your game plan. The other sections touched on this, but a lot of people will just kind of add cards which they have a reason for, and although that reason may be logical, it's still not a logical include based on the strategy of their deck. For example, on EDH Rec, we can see around 20% of people run Reliquary Tower in Joda, and probably there are times they draw up to more than 7 cards and don't want to have to discard. But does that make it right for their Joda deck? I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people running Reliquary Tower intend to cast Joda once they have 5 mana, but if one of their mana is colorless, they won't be able to do that. So this card doesn't actually support that strategy, and in fact can actively take away from it. Plus, a lot of these decks will run mass graveyard recursion spells like Eerie Ultimatum and Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, so it can actually be better to discard cards so that they can instead be returned to play for free. Now, what can happen, which I see sometimes, is people run a card which shouldn't be in their deck since it doesn't fit into their strategy, but they actually have a game where they win due to that card, which they probably shouldn't even be playing. This can create a feedback loop where because the player one time won a game due to the card which shouldn't be in their deck, they refuse to take it out, even though there are probably more times they actually lost games due to that card not being a card relevant to their game plan. Teferi's Protection is a very popular card like this. I don't run it in my Angels deck because I don't want to have to leave 3 mana up to cast this card. Instead, I want to be using that mana to advance my own game plan of casting Angels. If I put Teferi's Protection in the deck, I'm sure there would be games where I would win thanks to that card. However, there would also be times I lose because I draw it when I need to instead draw an Angel. Or if I have it in hand already, I might decide to always leave mana up in case I need to cast it, and then I won't advance my own board state as quickly as I should be. So instead of using Teferi's Protection to protect my board, I use free to cast spells like Flare Fortitude and Flawless Maneuver. I'll end by saying that none of this is to say you have to be purist about any of these points, but I do think people focus too much on trying to make the best deck containing good cards rather than trying to make the best deck for them or their strategy. At the end of the day, Magic is like any other game, and the best strategy is typically going to be the strategy you enjoy playing the most. If you don't enjoy playing board wipes, it could very well be because the board wipes don't work in your deck. If you don't enjoy running spot removal, maybe it's because you're seeing opening hands that would be more appropriate for a control deck, but you're trying to play mid-range or battle cruiser. Just because cards are good doesn't mean they're good for your deck, and it especially doesn't mean that if you add them into your deck, that deck will become more fun for you to actually play.